Hi, I'm Margaret Preston, president of Power Over Parkinsons, and today, in conjunction with our Pop Profile series, we have Leslie Davidson, author of the book Dancing in Small Spaces, one that she so poignantly wrote regarding her beloved husband's diagnosis with Lewy Body Dementia and her own journey through diagnosis with Parkinson's disease. Leslie, I can't thank you enough for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Margaret. I'm thrilled to be here.
We are thrilled to have you. Well, I'd like to jump right in and talk about Dancing in Small Spaces. I, of course, had the privilege of reading it. I'd love to navigate some of the points in the book and share with our listeners some of the wonderful themes woven through that book.
Okay.
Well, as we get started, I'd like for you to share a little bit more about your marriage with Lincoln. You all embarked on so many adventures, and you so poignantly wove that journey through this book. So I'd love for you to share about the adventures you all embarked on, and then also share with us the type of person, describe Lincoln as a person to our listeners.
Okay, well, how about I begin with a description of Lincoln?
Sure.
He was a quiet but not shy guy.
Mm-hmm.
Never needed to spend many words. I love to talk, so he knew that he would be covered. Really very passionate about the outdoors and the environment. It was the guy who couldn't even drive by a piece of litter. We were stopping the car and someone was having to reach out and pick it up off the road. He never went anywhere without a bag to put trash in. As we walked, he was the only time he got frustrated was when he could not get outside. He worked out his issues on long hikes. He always came home from a walk or a bike ride feeling better than when he left. And he was incredibly fit. His idea of a snack was a quarter of a cabbage. He walked around munching. Used to make our girls laugh. And just a very committed family guy. He was an outdoorsy fellow who wound up in a family with 3 women, and he included us in everything that he did that we were capable of doing. Very generous with his friends. Oh yeah, full of fun and life.
Yes.
and laughter, and very much in the moment. I would say about Lincoln that he had the greatest ability to be present in the moment, that more than anybody I've ever met in my life.
Yeah.
That we could drive all the way to Vancouver. It was a 7-hour drive, and he wouldn't speak. And I would say, what goes on in your head? And he said, honey, I'm just noticing.
Yeah.
And I think he had a tremendous capacity to notice, to just be in the moment, to be present. We fell in love very quickly. We were both young teachers. And then at the end of that teaching year, he proposed a trip to Europe. So we sold everything we had. We pooled our resources. We picked up a brand new Volkswagen camper in Germany. And we spent the next 15 months in Europe and North Africa traveling. And if you can live in a van that size for 15 months, you feel like you know each other pretty well. And then we came back, picked up our teaching careers. We started our family. We wound up in this beautiful little small town in southern British Columbia. Sort of, for American listeners, it's due north of Spokane, Washington. And we were there for over 30 years when we were diagnosed me with Parkinson's and Lincoln with Lewy body.
Right.
So we had been in retirement for a few years, Lincoln longer than I was. And we had spent the 3 years that post my retirement traveling all over North America. We went 3 times up and down the Baja Peninsula and through that amazing area where the 4 states meet: Utah, New Mexico, Colorado, and Nevada. Is that right? And through the West Coast, every mile of the Highway 1, through California, Washington, and Oregon, and constantly in our kayaks or in our canoe, having the best time, and deeply appreciative of what we were able to do.
Yeah. What I garnered from your marriage, of course, pre-diagnosis, was just the constant exploration of the world. Whether it's nature, different environments, but also exploration as the world, as parents, navigating parenthood and having girls. So you all were constantly curious and explorers, really, which was something I gained from the read. If we can move on to kind of what prompted you to write the book. So, we think about the beautiful relationship you all had, coupled with the devastating diagnoses that you all both experienced. I think it would have been quite understandable to shy away from sharing this story. What really prompted you to put pen to paper and share your story, truly with the world?
Well, I didn't know I was writing a book when I started to write these episodes down. The basis of the book is a whole lot of emails that I wrote to family and friends to keep them informed with what was happening with us. Things were changing very, very quickly with Lincoln, and they were anxious about us and wanted to know what was going on. But talking on the phone quickly became something that felt very disrespectful. Lincoln could, overhear conversations that were clearly about him, and he was unable to articulate very well what was going on for him. So after he went to bed, I would sit down at the computer and bang out an email about our day. And I found through that process that it was an unburdening for me.
Yeah.
As well as an opportunity to get information out to the people in our lives that cared about us. Over time, I turned more and more to writing, to express the big feelings, the things that could potentially overwhelm me, and I found that writing it down set it kind of at a distance, and from that distance I could see that we were very well supported, we were very well loved. There was lots of good things going on in our lives, despite the diseases that we were grappling with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's so poignantly said, in that when you said there was almost the distance, the separation, kind of peeling back those big feelings so they didn't feel all consuming. You can kind of step back and peel yourself away from them and create that distance. I love how you describe that.
Yeah, you kind of go, okay, this is happening and it's hard, but this is also happening.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful.
Yeah.
So, I learned very quickly that you aren't either or. You carry grief and joy.
Yeah.
At the same time.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, your diagnosis with Parkinson's was not your first experience with Parkinson's. Your sister-in-law, Christine, was diagnosed with Parkinson's as well. So share with our listeners kind of what you saw with your sister-in-law and what you were able to, now that you're on the other side and, certainly have the disease as well, some of the similarities and how her experience resonates with you today.
Wow. For Chris, it was a very, very different experience. She had multiple health problems, so this was just another, seemed to us almost like just one more.
Yeah.
Instead of being this all-defining illness that I think many of us with Parkinson's find it to be. She was and what they call an RNA, a registered nursing assistant, or so a very capable young professional.
Yeah.
And she was very early in her life. So she was a young onset. before there were many young onset people.
Right.
I read a book on Parkinson's when she was diagnosed, and it kind of, that would have been, oh my goodness, Margaret, that would have been almost 40 years now.
Yeah.
She was
Wow.
diagnosed. So the book was very basic, talked about
I
tremor,
bet.
talked about rigidity, talked about physical symptoms, very little about the non-motor symptoms. And it didn't even include exercise for treatment, as a treatment. And she was not inclined, someone who enjoyed physical exercise. She's quite the opposite of her brother.
Yeah.
So where I went into it very fit and strong and enjoying exercise, Chris didn't, and her progression was so quick and heartbreaking. So my notion of Parkinson's was of a very rapidly moving, very debilitating, very sad disease. And so when I was diagnosed, I immediately looked for information to give me some reassurance that that didn't have to be my picture.
Yeah.
And I was able to get that, of course, because we know so much more now, and I was so much more supported.
Yeah.
Than she was. She was alone in the world. We didn't live where she lived. We visited when we could, and to be honest, we didn't have any idea how serious this was, and we could have and should have provided better support.
Well, how fortunate are we now, as we think about gratitude, to know so much more about the disease? There's so much more to be learned and researched, but I do feel fortunate in that we've made tremendous strides in that books are thicker, information's thicker, guidance is more robust. So as we we'll move into gratitude, but that's certainly an area in which we can be grateful for.
Sure.
Well, share with as you shared your journey to diagnosis in the book, which was not unlike many others, as really you ruled out a lot of things before arriving at Parkinson's disease. I think that can certainly resonate with a lot of our listeners. You powerfully noted how the grief that accompanies the disease and diagnosis is shared. So talk to us about this sentiment, how you navigate the shared grief with your loved ones.
Well, when you tell your children, when you tell your children that you have Parkinson's, and they knew it from their Auntie Chris, excuse me, you are very aware by the tone of their voice or the look on their face that this is impacting them. And the same with my siblings and my mom. Our friends, everybody held this look of shock and sadness. I felt it really important to let them know that I was okay at that time. You know, I wanted to get the message out that this could get very hard down the road. We're not naive.
Right.
But right now, nothing has really changed. I have a little bit of a tremor. I can feel something going on in my left leg. It's dragging a bit, but really nothing has changed other than I have some anxiety about a future that it seems to be uncertain,
right,
and unpredictable, but everybody has that.
Yes.
No one's story is told ahead of time.
That's right.
And the choice I get to make, I may not have a choice about having Parkinson's, but the choice I get to make is how we respond to it, how we walk with it.
Absolutely.
So, what was the question again?
We talked about shared grief.
Oh, yes.
You so poignantly shared in your book, sharing it with your girls and how you could see their expressions and their concern. And you wanted to say, it's okay.
Yeah, and that we would be okay.
Yep, it's okay.
And I think not to deny how difficult it is to have that diagnosis, but I was cautioning myself all the time to remember that, yes, you have this big deal going on, but almost everybody that you meet has their own big deal going on.
Yeah.
And you don't want to shut down your compassion for them or shut down their comfort in expressing their concerns to you. I had people say to me, well, oh, I've had this awful thing happen, but oh, Leslie, it's nothing like, I mean, your awful thing is so much more than my awful thing. And I go, no, please don't think that. You know?
Let's all just talk about all of our awful things.
Yeah, and be as supportive as we can, and not feel that I'm somehow more fragile or more precious than anything else in the world.
It's a non-comparable. We all
exactly. Not a competition.
Yep. Well, as we move into gratitude, you described gratitude in the book as the thoughtful counting of blessings, the heart-centered attending to the beauty in the world and the goodness in people. So share with our listeners how you've chosen gratitude, despite being handed two life-changing diagnoses.
Well, I don't know how else to go through life.
That's a great answer.
It's I have been lucky, and there is nothing. I think gratitude is, we can choose we can't choose what happens to us. We can choose our responses. And sitting as a white, aging woman in North America with enough financial resource to be comfortable, to be warm and fed, at the very least, I have to be grateful.
Yeah.
And then I have all these other things, the beautiful place that I live in, my children, my grandchildren, our friends, music, art, nature. I don't see another way to be in the world. I learned that from my mom that I think I coined the phrase, we are what we think. And that if I practice gratitude quietly in my head, and I have been for years now, that it comes very easily to be grateful to new experiences and new things that touch me.
Yeah.
And it's a nice place to live.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Well, Leslie, I'd like to invite you to read what we call the tenderness excerpt that begins on page 62 in your memoir.
All right, I have to swap out my glasses here. The woman is beautiful. So is the man she is with. I am trying not to stare, and I can't tell which one of them has Parkinson's disease. I know one of them does, or they wouldn't be here in the waiting room of the Movement Disorders Clinic at the University of British Columbia. A name is called, and they both stand. Or rather, he stands and helps her to her feet. Now I can tell. He positions himself in front of her, and she grabs onto the back of his belt with 2 hands. As they slowly move out of the waiting room and down the corridor, he walks carefully. She is hesitant and rigid. They are an awkward 2-person conga line minus the music. It makes me want to cry. I'm not alone. My sister Jane is with me, but Lincoln is not. He is at home, a 7-hour drive away, again in the company of our friend John. Lincoln came with me for my first 2 trips to the UBC clinic, but he's not able to make this trip or any others. If I cannot be with him, I must arrange for someone else to keep him company, to keep him safe. John is unfazed by the care, willing and very kind. His sense of humor matches Lincoln's, and this break will be good for both Lincoln and me. The joys of Parkinson's man. Dry mouth.
You were fine.
As we wait, I find that I'm feeling envious of the beautiful woman, even though she is already struggling in ways that I am not, even though I feel ashamed to be reacting this way, even though she must cling to her husband's belt. I assume he is her husband. I'm envious because she has a caregiver who loves her. Another assumption, because despite the awkwardness, their moving together has a grace born of practice and something else. Tenderness, I think to myself. Tender. He tends to her tenderly. When I reach that stage, it won't be my husband with whom I walk. It will be an aluminum walker. That's one hell of a downgrade. Where is the grace in that? Where is the tenderness? I've just completed the depression questionnaire. It's part of the ritual of each visit to the clinic. Parkinson's is a dopamine deficiency disease, and dopamine is the feel-good neurotransmitter. Many people with Parkinson's deal with depression. My neurologist is a caring guy who wants to know if depression is an issue for his patients. Movement disorder is a misnomer. The non-motor symptoms of Parkinson's, the ones that are not obvious, are often more troubling than tremor or rigidity or loss of balance. If you are unaccountably sad or apathetic, or you can't sleep, or you have panic attacks, or all of the above, a tremor or a dragging foot can seem a minor inconvenience. Depression is a big deal, but so far, not my big deal. I hope it stays that way. An older couple also sits in the waiting room. This time it is obvious who has Parkinson's. Though the disease occurs in men at a slightly higher rate than in women, this is a day for the lady Parkies. He holds the clipboard on his lap and quietly reads the depression questions to her. She whispers her answers. I try not to listen. And I envy her too, because she has him. Their heads are together, almost touching. He waits for her answers and nods encouragement. He smiles at her, even though she cannot smile back. Her face is expressionless, masked by the advanced disease. But even so, they seem to share the kind of relationship that would normally touch and inspire me, make me feel blessed to have witnessed it. But I don't feel blessed. I'm frightened of that place, where she is, where I am probably headed, where my voice will be reduced to a whisper and my smile locked in behind a frozen face. There will be no he for me, no gentle smiling man to read the questionnaire. My world will be very small, perhaps about the size of a room in a long-term care home. My mother was 84 years old when my father died. He was 86. They'd been married for over 60 years. My dad was 80 before Alzheimer's began its cruel erosion of his fine intellect, his memory, and his sense of humor. My mother, a retired nurse, kept him at home and looked after him long past the point where that was reasonable or even safe. It took a bout of pneumonia to put him in the hospital, take away his ability to walk, and, because his doctor would not release him to my exhausted mother, to see him placed in a care facility. When he died, my mother's grief was almost unbearable to witness. Nothing eased her sorrow. When we visited her as a family, she would look at our girls and say to me, "Oh, how your dad would have loved seeing them." And then she would cry. When I visited alone, her conversation was all about my father, relentlessly about my father. It always left us both in tears. I did not have the heart to say, "No more, Mum, Mum, please, no more." During one visit, I suggested we walk along Dallas Road, a lovely oceanside route right outside the front door of her apartment building. "Let's walk out along the breakwater," I said. "It's a gorgeous day." "No," she replied, "I don't do that anymore. There are too many happy couples. I can't bear it." I was shocked by her answer and by her reason. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. Now I know what that kind of grief looks like. Now I know how everything can trigger memory. Now I know how hard it is not to be consumed by sorrow or to admit to the possibility of happiness and how disloyal that can feel. At that time, what I saw as her choice to be unhappy, to stay stuck in her pain, frustrated me. And it was so unlike my mom, a glass half full believer if ever there was one. She had always been the quiet strength in our family, a mother who welcomed her hurting children into her embrace with healing words and infinite patience. She was not perfect, but her capacity to love was as close to perfection as any I have ever experienced. I'm not going to do this, I promised myself. I'm never going to let my own grief make it impossible for me to be glad that others have joy in their lives, that others might have what I have lost. Lincoln's illness moves quickly, inhabiting him to the point of childlike dependence within the space of 2 short years. At the same time, my mother struggles with short-term memory loss, a symptom of her own progressive vascular dementia. At first, I have to tell her over and over that Lincoln is sick, that I have Parkinson's. That's why we aren't visiting as often as we used to. Oh, honey, she says each time, I'm so sorry. I should be there with you. And then she forgets and slips into what I think of as mom's missing dad brain groove. We become what we think, I decide. My mom is wearing pathways in her brain that only lead to sorrow. Every phone call is the same. Every phone call ends with weeping. I stop saying anything about my Parkinson's. Why put her through that? I mention it only if I'm with her and she notices my tremor or my clumsy movement. I can mitigate her distress by minimizing my own, by being cheerful. Life is good, Mom, I say. There are worse things. I sit in that waiting room with my loving, supportive sister by my side. I spend time with a physiotherapist and then with my neurologist. They both tell me I'm doing the right things, that I'm doing well. I feel like I did when I was a kid. I got handed a report card full of A's. I leave with an adjustment to my medication, some new exercises to challenge my balance and coordination. When I get home, Lincoln is very happy to see me. He beams and winks when he catches my eye. He follows me from room to room. He pats me, rapid little tap-taps on my head, my shoulder, my knee if we are sitting. He chuckles as he taps. He makes me laugh. He always has. And I love him with a tenderness that astonishes me, even as I grieve the loss of all he was. I think of my mother and the many years when she saw her glass as not only full, but overflowing, and this new, sad lesson from the day she would not walk on the breakwater. I find I am grateful for those moments of bitter envy in the waiting room, for what they have revealed to me about myself. There are worse things than Parkinson's disease. I have only to look around me to see suffering beyond anything I have personally endured. It is not that the hard lives of others disallow my own pain, because by comparison, I have no right to complain. I'm okay. Not because someone else lives an unhappier life than I do, but because I can choose gratitude. I can choose to be grateful in the same way I choose to love my husband, the way I tender love, offer it, hold out my hands and say, here, this is for you, no matter what comes. This is for you. And gratitude, the thoughtful counting of blessings, the heart-centered attending to the beauty in the world and the goodness in people. Despite all the cliche-ridden coffee cup and wall plaque manifestations of the word, gratitude. This is for me, and this I know. A mind full of gratitude has little room for envy. Does it sound like I'm trying to wear a groove in my own brain? Perhaps I am. And why not? I am my mother's daughter. I got through it.
That's beautiful, Leslie. Thank you so much for sharing. I've got a few questions regarding that passage, if that's okay. I'd really like to touch on your experience in the waiting room, because I think there was so much to garner from what you experienced in so many ways. I'd like to first talk about how we, as people with Parkinson's, everyone seems to have faces the disease differently. We know that to be true from a symptomatic standpoint, but also how one is cared for. And within that waiting room, you face the reality of not having your partner, Lincoln, navigate the disease with you. And that's your reality today. So I'd like for you to share with our listeners how you really accepted that really tough truth, certainly visible within that waiting room. How did you accept that was going to be your future as you navigated the disease without Lincoln?
I didn't really have a choice, I didn't think. And because that was the reality, going to be my reality, I don't like to be angry. I don't like to be sad. Don't enjoy feeling upset. So I have to find ways to be honest with myself and deal with what comes along as positively as I can. I don't believe in everything happens for a reason, but I do believe that there are lessons to be learned in everything that happens. Mm. A little bit of a difference there. I have role models. I had people who had faced huge challenges. I had friends who'd lost children and managed to get up in the morning and go and create good lives for themselves and for the rest of their families. And I would look at people like that and think, if they can do it with that damage to their heart, I can do this. Yeah.
Also within that passage and within that very same waiting room, we saw the dichotomy that sometimes there's things with Parkinson's that you see and those that you cannot see. So share with our listeners how you navigate with your loved ones, the unseen reality of Parkinson's. How do you communicate that so they have a better understanding of what you're experiencing? And that perception isn't always reality when it comes to Parkinson's, since there's so many invisible symptoms.
It's very interesting because I found that since I've had DBS, I had DBS 2 years ago, and I was very dyskinetic prior to DBS. So I was obviously, something was going on. People who don't know me well say, "Oh, you're doing so well," because I look so normal, I guess, in that way. But really, I'm struggling in more as time goes on.
Sure.
But my children have been wonderful about just believing me, just taking my word for it when I say, "I can't, guys." We have a vocabulary I'll talk about. It's a rug out from under me day, or I'm crashing, or my meds are oh, there's a little buzzy thing here. My meds are not working well. And I have some friends who that's all they need to know. And others who are just very curious about the mechanisms of the disease. They've really challenged me to do the reading and come up with the good medical explanations. And so I know from a couple of support forums that I'm on that there are people who really have to struggle with that communication piece, that they are finding that they are not believed, that when they are letting someone down, for instance, making a plan and not able to commit, that they're just using Parkinson's as a cop-out. And I know, I suppose it's possible that one of us could once upon a time, but I don't think that happens with the majority.
Right.
And I'm just very grateful that people accept when I say, this is going on, this is what I'm doing about it. And I answer the questions that they ask.
Yeah, absolutely. As I finished the book and I closed the book, I felt very struck by the metaphor between how you and Lincoln truly survived so many outdoor adventures. And then you all are faced with two devastating diagnoses and life-changing diagnoses. And I stepped back and I said, is it a coincidence? Is it a beautiful metaphor? I felt that whether you felt prepared or not, some of those, explorations that we talked about and those outdoor adventures seem to almost metaphorically prepare you for these life-changing diagnoses. I'd like for you to comment on how you feel life unknowingly prepares us in present moments for future moments.
Yeah, I've looked at this question since you sent it to me and thought, wow, that's a big one and a hard one, but really interesting. Lincoln and I spent a lot of time in a canoe, and there was an incident when we were on a canoe trip, a 2-week trip in central BC in a beautiful spot called Bowen Lakes. And there was a moose standing in the shallows, and Lincoln, being a keen photographer, wanted to get a picture, and I was terrified. She was a big cow moose, and she was maybe 10 feet away from us, and she was not happy with us coming so close. And so he's paddling forwards and I'm paddling backwards. And the picture, when it came out, was fuzzy. And I thought later, isn't that a metaphor for our relationship? He's going, let's go, let's have the adventure, let's get as close to it as we possibly can. And I'm going, no, we're in danger. That's a metaphor. But we were in the same boat. We didn't always paddle in the same direction, but we stayed in the boat. We knew that we were good travelers together, both metaphorically and in reality. We were so happy when we had our children on camping trips, on canoe trips, just, or day hikes. We knew we were good travelers together, that we could lean on each other. We were, we traveled enough that one or the other of us would be sick and the other would have to do everything. Mm-hmm. And that worked. We took our kids and we went to Scotland for a year on a teaching exchange, lived in the big city from this tiny little town. And we got through that. And I think we were at a place in our marriage and in our lives where it was finally getting easy. Where we weren't challenging each other or pushing back, or we had worked the differences out. Mm-hmm. In a very, very comfortable place and supportive place. So the only thing to do was to continue to do as we had been doing.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to ask you, if the tables were turned, do you feel that Lincoln would take the time to put pen to paper, share a heartwarming story about your marriage and your journey with Parkinson's disease?
Not in a million years. No, it would be he just doesn't have the words to spend. He would, and Lincoln could not have. I've been asked if he would have done for me what I did for him, which was spend 3 to 4 hours every day with him. And he couldn't have. He would have done for me as I did for him, in the sense that he would have done the best that he could. Mm-hmm. But he would not have been able to sit for that length of time. I love to read. I love to talk to people. Mm-hmm. I was quite happy to sit holding Lincoln's hand, or rubbing his back, and read my book, or talk to the other patients or to their family members, and be with him and know that he was safe and looked after. But that suited me, and it fed me, and it sustained me to be there with him. But for many caregivers, that isn't a sustaining thing to be doing. It just saps them and exhausts them and makes them sad. And so Lincoln wouldn't have written the book. Mm-hmm. And he would have done the best that he could. And it would have been good enough.
As we think about the book and we close our questions about the book, what do you think Lincoln's perception of the book would be?
Oh, good question. I think he would be kind of pleased. I mean, he was a quiet guy, but he was very much an iconic figure in our little town. He was the rattlesnake whisperer. He was the guy who bungee jumped naked off a bridge to raise money for charity. He, he was a character. He enjoyed knowing, I think, that there were Lincoln stories currently circulating. Mm-hmm. He wasn't boastful, but you could tell he was getting a kick out of mm-hmm. being kind of victorious. And so I think he would have enjoyed that. I think he might have struggled with how personal some of the stories are, especially the intimacies of caring for someone with dementia and what that involves. Mm-hmm. But I chose I would say to him that if people didn't know how hard it was for you,
Right.
they could never understand the grace with which you dealt with it and the courage. And I think you can understand that.
And what a privilege it is for you, and how fortunate you are to be able to share what he experienced and be able to communicate that, because not everyone saw that and quite understood everything he experienced.
Yeah.
Leslie, thank you so much for sharing your inner thoughts as an author of this truly lovely book. If it's okay, I'd love to just ask more Parkinson's related questions and check in with how you're doing, and then we'll wrap it up. How do you explain to others what it means to have Parkinson's disease? If you could give the tagline of the disease, what would you share with others?
It's like a reluctant teenager isn't taking over my brain.
Mm-hmm.
And it's when they don't want to do something, they don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have much control over it other than with my medication. That's problematic. Yeah.
Share with our listeners, I like this question because wouldn't we all want to have a magic wand in areas of our world? But share with our listeners, if you had a magic wand, what would be the first symptom of Parkinson's that you would eliminate?
Well, for the larger Parkinson's community, I think it would be depression.
Mm-hmm.
For myself, because I'm not having to do that, it would be insomnia.
Yes.
My sleep is everything. It's an all-consuming. It's just consuming. If I don't sleep well, I'm not well, and if I do sleep well, it's just incredible what a difference it makes. So
Yeah.
I could put up with. I'd have said the dyskinesia before DBS, though. Yeah, that was awful.
As we talk about Parkinson's, I think, we noted earlier in our discussion how so much has been learned about this disease in just, the last 10, 15 years, 40 years, as we talked about Christine's journey. But there's an array of symptoms that so many are unfamiliar with. There's still, despite the education that's been done, there's still those who really find or feel or understand the disease to truly just be synonymous with a tremor.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could shine a light on a little known symptom, or one that you may experience or one that you may know of, what would you shine a light on to be able to communicate with others?
Anxiety and apathy, I think. As with a real emphasis on the fact that they are symptoms of the disease. They are not someone's weakness of character or a personal choice, that they are biochemical manifestations of a disease over which none of us have any control. And there aren't good medications for apathy, particularly. And the anxiety meds come with all kinds of, well, everything we take comes with this huge handbag of side effects. But from listening to the people in our little support group here, and from reading, I find that that's just, I've had to say, I had an old husband say to me, it's all in her head. And I said, yes, it is. Right. It absolutely is all in her head, but it is not a choice.
Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you for sharing that. Well, Leslie, share with our listeners how you're doing today.
Well, today's a pretty good day because I got some sleep last night. Generally, I'm doing well. I live alone. I can look after everything that I need to for myself, by myself. I'm struggling with my medication not working, and that has, it really, it makes it impossible for me to do anything. literally, and wait for it to kick in so that I can move again.
Mhm.
I'm working hard on that. I have, I'm pretty happy. I'm well supported. My kids live nearby. My grandchildren are here in my house, in my place on a regular basis. They bring me great joy. I'm really thoroughly sick of winter. And I know that I will be even happier when there's green grass and
Absolutely.
flowers. Yeah.
Well, as we conclude our discussion, for those who don't know, you've done a lot of advocacy work. So share with our listeners where they can learn more about your advocacy work, and where they can get a copy of Dancing in Small Spaces.
Okay. Well, Dancing in Small Spaces would be available anywhere in the States through Amazon or Barnes and Noble. Should be able to be ordered from any small independent bookstore, but because it's a Canadian press, I don't know. Amazon is probably the easiest way to get a hold of it. I have a website, which is leslieadavidson.com, www.leslieadavidson.com. And on that, you will find there's videos and articles that I have written, videos that I've made that have been taken of, for example, speaking at Parkinson's BC conference, and articles that I've written for the Globe and Mail, Toronto newspaper, and yeah, those are the two best places to go. Yeah.
Perfect. And we will include certainly all of that information within the text of our conversation. So we hope to make it very accessible. And for those in the United States, Amazon is certainly a great avenue to purchase the book. I've seen it and read all the wonderful reviews. So, well, Leslie, I can't thank you enough for sharing your time with us today. Your memoir, I mean, your choice to put pen to paper has truly personally touched me. And I know will touch our listeners as well as they journey through Parkinson's disease and truly any diagnosis, navigating it with grace, gratitude, really raw determination and survival, as we talked about your journey. So, Leslie, I can't thank you enough for spending your time and sharing your time with the Pop Profile series.
Well, thank you very much, Margaret. It's been a privilege, a true privilege. Thanks.
Thank you.